Guillen is one of the leading authorities on ancient civilizations in Peru. She spent the last 11 years working in the country's southern deserts, searching for a civilization that managed to survive here more than 1,000 years ago. April is Sonia's busiest time. She will spend the next 3 months digging the desert sands, uncovering the secrets of the dead.
Well, I wanted to do what I'm doing since I was a child, you know, and I've been really privileged. I have visited mummies in many different places in the world.
It is the ancient people of these desert sands that have captivated Sonia. Their preserved remains lie buried here in one of the harshest environments in the world. 500 years before the Inca ruled this land, the Chiribayas settled in the southernmost reaches of Peru. On the fringes of the Atacama Desert, the valley was carved out by the Osmore River. A narrow green oasis in the Ilo Valley helped the Chiribaya survive these tough conditions. Their communities stretched from the Pacific coast 25 miles inland. There may have been around 30,000 people living here, but their simple mud houses have not survived the centuries. It's only by excavating their graves that Sonia and her team can piece together how this lost civilization lived.
We're going to Chiribaya Baja now. This is one of the archaeological sites we've been working at through the years. And we are going to work with some tombs that have been exposed. My job is full of amazing events. Every day I can't help but being surprised by something new, even though I've been here enough years to sort of think that I know most of what's going to happen.
Sonia's latest site is 3 miles inland from the coast, on the edges of the Atacama Desert. Here, a few feet away, lie hundreds of burial chambers hidden just beneath the surface. They're not elaborate, only simple pits in the sand.
But this is the cemetery where we're working this season, and they've already reached the top of a large tomb, so this is going to be quite exciting.
Sonia's team marks out small areas to work in. They know from past experience that they are likely to find at least a dozen tombs here. Sometimes graves are even stacked one on top of the other. These crowded cemeteries help prove there must have been a large population living here some 1,000 years ago.
So far we've recovered over 300 burials, and we're still working at the site.
The tombs are all that is left of the Chiribaya's world, which spanned 500 years. Sonia must use these finds to help her build up a picture of their lifestyle, and it's not just human remains that are providing an insight. At an earlier dig, the team uncovered a mummified llama, flattened and fragile after some 1,000 years under the sand. It had been sacrificed and laid in a place of honor. It must have represented one of the Chiribaya's most valuable resources.
It's evident llamas were being farmed all throughout the coast, and in this valley there were large herds of animals being available for wool, for food, and for cargo.
Llamas were a cornerstone of the Chiribaya economy and an important part of their everyday lives.
Llamas were like members of the family for them. They also were included in special religious activities because they were presented as offerings. They were sacrificed and offered to the gods. They were really important for the Chiribayas.
For Sonia and her team, the llama was an important clue that this was probably a prestigious tomb. As they lifted the roof stone, artifacts began to emerge that would have been offerings to the person buried beneath the sand. The cane pipes of a flute, an early example of an instrument that is still in use throughout the Andes.
This is the underlayer of this musical instrument.
But by far the most elaborate offerings from the grave are spectacular ceramic pots. The artwork still clear even after 1,000 years underground. The pots were probably used to carry water or for cooking. The Chiribaya believed they would need these household goods in the next life. Most mummies have at least one piece of fine pottery buried with them. Finally, at the bottom of the tomb is the body of a Chiribaya concealed in a dusty cloth. It seems this ancient civilization believed that preserving the body would allow the spirit to endure, so every effort was made to keep it intact for as long as possible. The Chiribaya may have realized that desert sand would help preserve their dead.
Finding mummies here is connected to the fact that we are in one of the driest deserts in the world. But moreover, the soils are full of nitrates. These salts prevent decomposition because they don't allow bacteria to thrive. So bodies are dried before they can decompose. A lot of what we know comes from the last social moment of somebody's life, which is their departure from this world. Funerals are also made for the living, not just for the dead person. What you're seeing in these cemeteries is human behavior. You can feel the sorrow that was around.
Everything the team recovers from the site is brought back to Sonia's research center, a mile down the road. Known as Centro Malki, the center houses one of the most remarkable collections of ancient peoples in the Western Hemisphere. At present, over 500 mummies and the skeletal remains of 4,000 people are stored here. The technicians patiently clean away the dust and sand before the mummies are packed away for further study. But it's not just the mummies that are important. The ceramics found with the bodies also have a story to tell. The white dots on the edge of this vessel are a classic Chiribayan trademark. The most recent mummy find has been brought to the center. In the courtyard, each offering is put in exactly the same position as when the body was first placed in the tomb.
We are not only trying to recover artifacts or human remains, we're trying to reconstruct human activity. We're trying to reconstruct rituals. They were giving to this person something to take to the other world.
This individual was buried with typical Chiribaya offerings, including 8 ceramic vessels and the heads of 2 sacrificed llamas. The wool from these animals may have been used to weave the textiles and pouches buried with the body. The Chiribaya not only had elaborate clothing, fantastic hats have also been found in some of the tombs, adorned with feathers from tropical birds that may have come from the Amazon rainforests more than 300 miles away.
This is a very harsh environment. They were not only living and exploiting the resources around, but they were also full of color and art and music, which we can see from the relics of their life that we find when we excavate the cemeteries. And this harsh environment has also allowed this wonderful preservation of their art and culture.
Offerings of food are also common in many burials. Though darkened and stale after 1,000 years underground, the food still looks remarkably fresh.
Finding preserved food is one of the extraordinary aspects of archaeology here, where we can actually find what they ate, how they prepared their food, how they prepared their drinks, and allowing us to get a bigger picture of how people lived here in the past.
So far, Sonia has found over 300 mummies at the Chiribaya Baja site. But with the help of pioneering new technologies and the stunning discovery of a specially preserved body, more secrets of the desert mummies are about to be revealed. Dr. Sonia Guillen is an expert on ancient civilizations in Peru. For the past 11 years, she has been digging in the Atacama Desert, uncovering hundreds of extraordinary mummies. These human remains are helping the team uncover the secrets of the Chiribaya, who lived here more than 1,000 years ago. Their tombs are all that remain of this lost civilization. And now the team have discovered another Chiribayan body. This latest mummy appears to be an old man. It's a short truck ride to Sonia's research center. She's hoping new technology will be able to help her unravel more about this ancient Chiribayan's history. Jerry Conlow and Ron Beckett from Quinnipiac College in Connecticut have helped pioneer new techniques for X-raying mummies in the field. The images they capture will allow the team to see what is beneath the mummy's wrappings.
So now it's a matter of developing the film, keeping our fingers crossed. You got it on your end?
Inside the Centro Malki darkroom, the X-rays develop in a matter of minutes.
Okay, so what do we have?
The X-ray reveals more than they were expecting. Inside the mummy's chest cavity appears to be the outline of a pot.
If I'm reading correctly, this is inside the chest cavity. See, the ribs are sort of embracing the...
Curving around.
Yeah, curving around the pot. Now, I've seen other cases where they've taken out the lungs, the liver, everything. They've cleaned it thoroughly, and they put wool and artifacts inside. So I would bet this is an embalmed body, and I think it's worth it unwrapping this bundle to confirm this. We've had very few of these cases here. We knew there were embalmed bodies, but sort of finding a pot inside somebody's chest cavity was sort of still unexpected and still caused us a lot of surprise.
The pot appears to have been put in the place of the internal organs. When ancient civilizations mummified their dead, these were sometimes removed to stop the body from decomposing. Just a handful of the mummies examined by Sonia have been given this special treatment. It suggests that only important members of Chiribaya society received this extra care. Sonia has decided to unwrap the mummy to find out more.
It's a difficult phase to figure out that there's some gray hair that have turned gold, just like mine.
Unwrapping the mummy is an incredibly intricate process. The mummy has survived under the sand for more than 1,000 years. Any false move now could destroy valuable evidence about the Chiribaya. The X-ray also revealed there was no sign of damage to any of the bones. This is an indication that the Chiribaya seem to have been a peaceful civilization.
They were not warriors. They were people living in this harsh environment, keeping to themselves, connecting to their neighbors in a peaceful manner.
When the Chiribaya lived here, somewhere between 900 and 1350 AD, this valley would have looked quite different. On the banks of the Osmore River, the richest soil was devoted to the cultivation of crops that supplied ample harvest. Here they also buried their loved ones in cemeteries close to their homes. The Chiribaya used vegetable dyes for color and were expert weavers, designing highly patterned and elaborate textiles. A few miles from the Chiribaya's main settlements is the Pacific Ocean. They would fish here to complement the crops they grew in their desert oasis. The Chiribaya used log rafts to get out to sea and stretched hand-woven nets along the coastline. From the shore, they hauled in whatever catch the sea had to offer. In this way, the Chiribaya maximized every resource available to them in this marginal land. 1,000 years later, Sonia turns to techniques from the 21st century to find out more about the burial practices of this ancient civilization. A tiny camera, an endoscope, is about to be placed inside the mummy to see if it can pinpoint a pot that is inside the chest and reveal if there is anything inside.
Oh, that's so much better.
That's all you feel?
Okay. Oh. Can you see something?
The camera can travel easily through the inside of the body. Soon pictures of the stomach cavity emerge.
I mean, we could look around outside. Now, obviously, that's out. At least you can feel some of the packing. Fibers.
The camera reveals the stuffing of llama wool that was packed inside the stomach cavity to stop decomposition. The swirling particles on the screen are fragments of dry skin and bits of wool stirred up by the tiny camera.
You are inside the abdominal cavity. No organs, no intestines.
But through this entrance, the camera can't get close enough to see what, if anything, is inside the pot. They try another opening for the camera where the skin has separated from the mummy's collarbone. This time they find what they're looking for. In the center of the screen, the rounded mouth of a small gray ceramic pot comes into view.
Down here, see? That circular part? That's the edge of the pot right there. Let's go down there.
At last, the camera gets close enough to the pot to show the team what's inside.
There. Coca leaves, sort of coca inside and outside.
Yeah, there's a forest of leaves here.
Oh, wonderful. This is
Great.
You know, coca being a sacred plant and really important part of Andean rituals, you know, it's really not surprising to find it inside the body.
Coca leaves were used as offerings to the gods and still have spiritual connections in Peru today. The camera has helped the team to understand how the old man's body was prepared for the afterlife. Through an incision in the abdomen, the embalmers removed all of the internal organs. They inserted a pot full of coca leaves into the empty cavity inside the ribcage and packed the remaining space with wads of llama wool, closing the incision with stitches.
He probably was 60, 70 years old. He must have been very important for other people as they put so much effort and so much time on making sure that he could still be part of their lives after he was gone.
The coca leaves are still of use to Sonia today. It's possible to find out when the old man was alive by dating the leaves that were buried with him.
Now we have techniques that can work with very little material.
The most effective technique for assessing the age of ancient organic material is radiocarbon dating. But the equipment needed is not available at Sonia's research lab, so she must head for Boston, Massachusetts. At the geochron lab, the coca leaves are thoroughly dehydrated and packed into a quartz tube. The goal is to extract pure carbon-14, a radioactive element. Plants and all other living organisms continue to take in carbon-14 until they die. At that point, the radioactive carbon begins to break down at a constant rate. By measuring the amount of carbon-14 left in the coca leaves, it's possible to calculate how long ago they died.
So for the coca leaves?
The coca leaves are about 600 years old. That dates the mummy's time of death to somewhere between 1350 and 1450 AD, close to the end of the Chiribaya culture.
Finding the old embalmed man was very significant because he was one more of the very few artificially preserved bodies we have found here.
So far, only 20 out of the hundreds of mummies discovered have been treated in this way. If these people were the elite of the Chiribayan society, it suggests a small ruling class.
The Chiribaya were very much different to other Andean groups, especially the Incas. They were not a hierarchical society. You don't find burials of people that receive lots of indications of concentration of wealth, and there's not much of an evidence of intergroup warfare.
The hope is that Sonia will find mummies that date from all phases of the Chiribaya's history, and a more detailed picture about how their culture evolved will begin to emerge.
There's something we can learn from these people that 1,000 years ago, from this very tiny oasis, could get enough resources not only to survive, but to live peacefully and surrounded by color, by art, by music, by love.
"24 centuries ago, the heartland of China was torn by conflict. In the period known as the Warring States, the ancient authority of the Zhou dynasty faltered, and a dozen upstart kingdoms struggled for dominance. But the struggle wasn't confined to the battlefield. In each kingdom, ruling families established distinct codes of conduct, art, music, and philosophy. From this rivalry, China's two great philosophies, Confucianism and Taoism, would eventually emerge. Only one sacred belief bound the rulers of the warring states together, that they could tap into the supernatural power of their ancestors. If state and religious ceremonies were performed correctly, the spirits of the dead would bless the ruling house. Crucial to these rituals was bronze for the crafting of bells that would appease and entertain the ancestors at sacred feasts. Without food, wine, and music, the ancestors would not look favorably upon them, and without their aid, no ruler could succeed. More crucial than the sword or chariot, the bronze bell became a vital instrument of ultimate power. For generations, Western scholars tried to explain the rise of Chinese civilization by comparing it to the West. They assumed that ancient Chinese rulers acquired power by controlling farming or water resources. But archaeology has helped to paint a very different picture. In ancient China, material wealth meant little without access to the supernatural. And that is the lesson of one of the most amazing archaeological finds of the century. In 1977, a nondescript hill in the province of Hubei in central China was about to make history. A detachment of the People's Liberation Army was ordered to level the hill to make way for the factory. They hit on a strange layer of grey soil, which they reported to local authorities. Then a few months later, they struck large stone slabs, which turned out to be the lining of a massive burial pit 70 feet across. Archaeologists moved in. Digging down through the protective layers of soil and clay, the team finally reached a series of massive timbers. Crowds gathered as the great beams were hoisted aside. Among the witnesses was archaeologist Chu Zimei, now director of the Provincial Museum.
Once the crane removed the roof, we saw a pool of water. We saw wooden art objects floating everywhere. There were many wooden art objects. It was beautiful. My colleagues and I were both surprised and happy at that moment.
They had uncovered the tomb of a ruler buried with 7,000 of his possessions. The tomb was divided into 4 chambers. In one of the side chambers, they found a series of coffins made of lacquered wood. One coffin was larger than all the others. It contained the bones of a man of about 45 years of age. The coffin was surrounded by bells.
When we removed the bells and other metal objects from the tombs, we verified that most objects were in bronze and the name Chuhui were inscribed on them. This means that all these objects belong to Chu Hoi, and only he had the rights to use them. Chu is the name of the state. Ho is nobility title meaning marquis. Yi is his name. It is customary to name the owner of the tomb in this manner.
Alongside the casket of the Marquis Yi lay 8 smaller coffins, all containing female skeletons. In another side chamber, 13 more emerged, again all females. These 21 women were probably concubines or attendants, sacrificed to accompany their master to the next world, a practice widely documented in Bronze Age China. Since the skeletons bore no obvious signs of injury, it's possible the women were strangled. The third of the small chambers concealed layers of chariot fittings, armor, and weapons of war. But it was the main chamber that concealed the biggest surprise of all. An orchestra of more than 20 instruments in bronze, stone, and bamboo, mostly underwater. Zithers, flutes, and many other objects made of lacquered wood were either waterlogged or half rotten. Their delicate state demanded special care. At the Hubei Museum, the challenge of preserving the fragile wooden finds led to years of experimentation to duplicate ancient Chinese lacquer. The objects were originally carved from soft, smooth woods coated with layers of paste and thin cloth. The lacquer was a fast-drying, high-gloss varnish collected from the sap of a sumac tree. The sap was boiled down and mixed with pigments. An object might have as many as 250 layers, often applied in intricate designs. But objects submerged in water for centuries will disintegrate if they are allowed to dry. So each is kept in water until it can be transferred to a bath containing a polymer solution. After 2 months, the water inside the object is replaced by the polymer. The result is an artifact, half wood, half polymer, with the original lacquer coating intact. One of the first instruments to emerge from the lab was a set of panpipes covered in intricate design. Chinese legends say that the principle of musical pitch was discovered when a sage named Ling Lung took bamboo pipes like these and tuned them to the call of the mythical bird, the phoenix. More elaborate instruments were reconstructed in the lab. 7 great zithers, one with 25 silk strings, are among the earliest and most complete ever found. Wear marks on the sound box prove that the zithers were played for some time before burial. There were drums, 4 mouth organs made from gourds, and a set of 32 carefully tuned stone chimes, each carved from grey limestone, suspended from a bronze rack, here played on a replica of the original. But there is nothing in the world of ancient music to match the magnificent set of bells, 64 of them, made from over 5 tons of cast bronze. An inscription on a separate bell records that the set was given to Maki Yi, master of the warring state of Zheng. The date is 433 BC. Unfortunately, no music from this period has survived to be played on the bells. Even so, for experts in early Chinese music like Kenneth DeWaskin of the University of Michigan, the discovery of the bell set came as a revelation.
The Marquis Yi was ruler of a small feudal state called Zheng in 5th century BC China during what's called the Warring States period. Actually, we knew nothing about the Marquis or his state of Zheng until this remarkable bell set was discovered. So it was through the discovery of these bells and the other items in the tombs that archaeologists and historians learned about the existence of this important person.
These bells have no clappers. They were struck by wooden hammers and poles discovered in the tomb. Every bell has a unique feature that took music historians completely by surprise.
One of the most impressive features of these bells is the fact that one bell can emit 2 different sounds, a low tone in the center and a higher tone on the edge. This was a tremendous technological achievement in the 5th century BC, and one, in fact, which modern bell makers have found very difficult to imitate. Now, this took a lot of effort, and one question is, why did the Chinese commit so much work to making one bell which could emit 2 tones?
DeWaskin believes the 2 tones reflect the idea of a universe governed by 2 opposing yet harmonious forces, the concept of yin and yang.
Well, archaeological remnants have demonstrated to us that from very early on, Chinese culture was interested in balance and symmetry. And this idea later became encoded in the idea of yin and yang. All of life, all the activity in the world is a result of 2 competing and interacting forces. So the day is made by the sun and the moon, by daylight and night. Human life is created by male and female. All the activity on the earth is the interaction of heaven and earth, and so forth and so on. The bells themselves are demonstrations of how 2 forces can interact at once. And so we have this effect of 2 notes in one bell.
Every bell carries an inscription identifying the 2 tones it was supposed to produce. It must have taken centuries of trial and error to figure out how to cast a bell with the 2 desired notes. Scholars have compared the bell's inscriptions with the notes they actually produce, as art historian Lothar von Falkenhausen explains.
Now, the degree of tuning exactitude in those bells is not 100%. There's a certain amount of inexactitude in the casting, but considering the level of technological development at the time, and considering especially the state of Chinese mathematics in the 5th century BC, the degree of exactitude, I mean, the fit between what we can read in the inscription and the tones that still can be produced on the bells today is simply astounding. These craftsmen who cast the bells were not some dusty guys in a violin shop, but they were probably the most advanced technicians of their age, possibly comparable to, you know, supercomputer engineers or nuclear physicists of our age.
It took 5,000 pounds of bronze to make the bell set, vastly outweighing the amount invested in the Marquis's weapons, armor, and chariot fittings. His military equipment was stored in a side room, but the orchestra was the centerpiece of the burial. It filled the entire central chamber of the tomb.
Music was a way of making people move in harmony without any visible forces of coercion. In other words, without laws and without police, when people danced, they all moved together. And that became in early China a very important metaphor for ideal social harmony. Even the famous Chinese philosopher and teacher Confucius danced with his disciples every day as a way of communicating to them what he thought the ideal society should be like.
The great bells were not played for entertainment. Poems dating back centuries before Marquis Yi's time describe ceremonial feasts held by noble families for their ancestors. Bells and drums sound magnificently. Musical stones and flutes chime in. The dead kings send down their blessings that are abundant. They are drunk. They are full. Blessings and happiness come again and again.
As the bells, through their powerful music, are able to reach across, to divide, and speak to the ancestors. The Marquis's ancestors were dead, but they were not gone. They remained very important. They could punish him. They could reward him. They could help him maintain his power. They could take it away. He had to demonstrate his gratitude to them, because not only did they give him his body and his life, but they gave him his fiefdom.
And in order to maintain the contact to these supernatural powers, these rituals and sacrifices had to be performed according to a strict schedule. And it was in that context that the music was performed on the instruments, and that, of course, these many splendid ritual vessels that were discovered in the same tomb were also used. And they were simply the most important thing that a state could have. They embodied the authority of the state, and therefore it was appropriate to expend any amount of resources the state had at its disposal on the manufacture of such object.
If the Marquis wanted to have a set of bells like this, he didn't go to the bell store and buy them. He had to make them. And what did making bells really mean? It meant that the ore diggers, the miners who dug the copper and the tin and the lead out of the ground had to be under his control. The smelters who made the ingots, the transportation of the ingots to his city, the casters, the technicians, the bell designers, the musicians, the acoustical experts, the people who made the bells all had to be under his control. And then the dancers and the musicians themselves, the ritualists who told them when to play and how to play, all had to be under his control. And so when the Marquis hung a set of bells like this in front of his people and performed them, they understood the tremendous range of control that he exercised.
Ritual feasts were critical to maintaining the power of rulers. And because so many resources were lavished on the bells, the instruments themselves became powerful symbols of authority.
It took 5,000 pounds of bronze to make this chime set. That much bronze must have represented a great deal of the material wealth of the small state of Zheng. Burying this with the marquee was a little bit like taking all of the gold in Fort Knox and putting it in the tomb of an American president. Why would so much wealth be put in the tomb? Well, probably it was the marquis's wish to have this bell buried with him. And since the marquis, like his own ancestors, would be dead but not gone, he could continue to exercise power over his descendants, and they would pretty much have to observe his wishes. What was his vision of life after death that made him interested in having the bells? Well, we don't know everything about life after death in early Chinese view, but we do know that the idea of what happened in the tomb was not so different from life on Earth. People needed to eat. People could still enjoy the pleasures of music and other pleasures of that sort. So the bells were there, lights were there. Very often one finds lamps. And of course the marquis had 21 young girls who we might assume were dancers or possibly even his consorts buried with him in the tomb.
The inscriptions on the bells reveal another surprising fact. Each of the rival warring states had its own special musical language. The inscriptions provided a guide for the musicians so that if the ruler of another state paid a visit, they could play in a style appropriate to the identity of their visitors. Rivalries between the states were fought out in a kind of ceremonial war of music.
Now, already in feudal China, the texts talk about some rulers being cultural rulers and some rulers being military rulers. It's evident from the amount of wealth and resources that the marquis invested in his music that he belonged to the class of cultural rulers. And he probably depended on his very powerful neighboring country of Chu for the military security of his fiefdom in Zheng.
But the era of the warring states came to an end when the first of China's emperors finally unified the country in 221 BC. The struggle for supremacy was over. The great ceremonial orchestras disappeared. The ritual and politics of the musical feasts became obsolete as beliefs and power structures shifted. Even in Marquis Yi's time, we can see the shape of music to come. In the side chamber where the coffins of the Marquis and 8 of his attendants were found was a small collection of zithers, mouth organs, and a drum. On these instruments, the music was played purely for his entertainment. Replicas of the instruments still charm the ear, as they must have 24 centuries ago. As the 4th gave way to the 3rd century BC, the great bell orchestras were replaced by small, informal instrumental groups. Music lost much of its political and religious function and became entertainment for the nobility. Royal feasts changed from pompous occasions for the dead to mere indulgences for the living. The puritanical followers of Confucius railed against the new music and the spirit of debauchery and lewdness that came with it. Certainly an era had vanished. The great ringing tones of the Bronze Age bells never again echoed through the royal courts of China. Confucius and his followers lamented the passing of the old ways. But a poem from Marquis Yi's time reveals that not every feast was a solemn affair for communing with the dead. Pipes and zithers rise in wild harmonies. The sounding drums thunderously roll. The lovely women are drunk with wine. Their faces are flushed with amorous glances and flirting looks. Their eyes like wavelets sparkle. Dressed in embroideries, clad in finest silks, splendid but not showy. Their long hair, falling from high chignon, hangs low in lovely tresses. Hat strings and fastenings become untied. The revel turns to